Famine was not rare in medieval Europe. It was a recurring nightmare. Expected, feared, inevitable. Between the years 1000 and 1450, Europe experienced major famines every few decades. Some lasted months, others stretched for years. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1322 killed millions across the continent. Crops failed, livestock died, people starved in the streets. But most peasants didn't die during famines. They survived. How did they do it? The answer lies in foods we would barely recognize as edible today. Medieval peasants ate things modern people would reject with disgust. But these foods contained calories, nutrients, life. Understanding medieval famine food requires understanding medieval agriculture first. Peasants grew grains primarily: wheat, barley, rye, oats. These crops formed the foundation of every meal in good times. Bread was the staff of life. A peasant consumed 2 pounds daily. Vegetables grew in small gardens: peas, beans, onions, cabbage, leeks. Meat was rare, reserved for special occasions or the wealthy. Most peasants ate meat only a few times yearly. Their diet was grain-heavy, vegetable-supplemented, protein-poor. When harvest failed, the entire system collapsed. No grain meant no bread meant starvation. Famines followed predictable patterns throughout medieval history. Weather was the primary trigger: too much rain, too little rain, extended cold periods, early frosts, late springs. Any deviation from normal growing conditions spelled disaster. Medieval farming had no margin for error. Crop yields were low compared to modern standards. Farmers planted 1 bushel of grain, harvested 4 bushels back. Today, that ratio is 1 to 40 or higher. Medieval agriculture was inefficient, primitive, vulnerable. A single bad season meant hunger. 2 consecutive bad seasons meant famine. Peasants learned to recognize the warning signs early: thin wheat stalks in June, moldy grain in July, small harvests in August. By September, families knew whether winter would bring suffering. The first response was rationing, reducing daily bread consumption. Instead of 2 pounds, eat 1 pound, then ½ a pound. Stretch every grain as far as possible. The second response was substitution. Replace expensive grains with cheaper alternatives. If wheat failed, use barley. If barley failed, use oats. If oats failed, things became desperate. The third response was foraging. Search forests, fields, and waterways for anything edible. This is where the 15 famine foods become crucial. These were not normal meals, they were survival rations, eaten only when regular food supplies ran out completely. Some were nutritious, others barely kept people alive. All were better than starvation. Modern nutritionists would be horrified by most of these foods. But medieval peasants understood something important about survival. Calories matter more than taste, more than texture, more than dignity. Empty stomachs kill. Disgusting food keeps you breathing. That calculus governed every decision during famine periods. The third famine food was pea pod soup. Normally peasants ate the peas, discarded the pods. Pods went to animal feed or compost. They had no food value, or so people thought in good times. During famines, nothing was wasted. Everything was reconsidered. Pea pods contained fiber, small amounts of protein, some vitamins. The pods were tough, stringy, unpleasant to eat whole. But boiled for hours, they softened. Released nutrients into water. Peasants collected dried pea pods from summer harvests. These were stored, saved for emergencies. When famine struck, the pods were brought out. Boil them in water for 3 or 4 hours. The resulting liquid was thin, greenish, slightly viscous. It wasn't delicious, but it was warm. It filled the stomach. Sometimes peasants added the softened pods themselves, chopped fine. This added bulk made the soup more filling. Wild herbs were added when available: nettles, dandelion greens, sorrel. These improved flavor, added vitamins. Pea pod soup kept many families alive through lean winter months. It cost nothing, used waste products, required only water and fire. The fourth famine food was nettle porridge. Stinging nettles grew wild across Europe, in fields, along roads, near forests. Most people avoided nettles. The leaves caused painful stings, but nettles are highly nutritious, rich in iron, calcium, vitamins. Medieval peasants knew this. They harvested nettles carefully, wear gloves or wrap hands in cloth, cut young nettle tops before the plant flowers. Older nettles became tough, bitter, less nutritious. The stinging quality disappeared when nettles were cooked. Boiling destroyed the compounds that caused irritation. Peasants boiled nettles like spinach. The greens wilted, turned dark. But nettle porridge required more than just boiled greens. Grind the cooked nettles, mix with whatever grain was available. Oats worked best. Barley was acceptable. Wheat if you were fortunate. Add water, cook into thick porridge. The result was green-tinged, earthy tasting, nutritionally valuable. Nettle porridge provided protein, iron, vitamins that prevented scurvy. It grew everywhere, cost nothing, saved lives. Some regions ate nettles regularly even in good times. Scotland, Ireland, parts of Scandinavia. But during famines, nettle consumption exploded across the continent. Fields were stripped of every young nettle plant. The fifth famine food was fish head stew. Coastal and river communities had access to fish. In normal times, the best parts were eaten. Fillets, steaks, heads, bones and tails went to waste or fed to animals. During famines, everything changed. Fish heads contain meat in the cheeks, around the bones. They also contain fat, collagen, nutrients in the eyes and brain. Medieval coastal peasants collected discarded fish heads from markets, from fishing boats, from processing areas. The heads were boiled for hours until everything softened. Bones released calcium and minerals. Fat rose to the surface. The resulting broth was rich, nutritious, calorie-dense. Peasants picked through the softened heads, extracted every bit of meat, even tiny fragments. Nothing was wasted. The eyes were eaten. The brain was eaten. Cheek meat was prized. Softened bones were sometimes ground, added back to the stew. This provided calcium, texture, bulk. Fish head stew was common in Norway, Scotland, coastal France. Northern Germany, it smelled terrible. The appearance was unappetizing, but it provided protein, fats, minerals that prevented malnutrition. Fishing communities survived famines better than inland areas. Access to fish, even discarded parts, made the difference. These first five foods share common characteristics. Social hierarchy determined who starved first during famines. The wealthy had stockpiles, stored grain, preserved meats, imported foods. They suffered inconvenience. Peasants suffered death. Lords and clergy maintained relatively normal diets, even during severe famines. They controlled grain reserves, owned productive lands, had purchasing power. Peasants had none of these advantages. Their survival depended on knowledge passed through generations. Which plants were edible, which preparation methods removed toxins, which foods sustained life longest. This knowledge was oral, demonstrated, remembered. Grandmothers taught daughters, fathers taught sons. Famine food preparation was essential cultural knowledge. Those who remembered survived. Those who forgot died. Let's examine the first five famine foods that saved countless lives. Each represents a category of survival eating. Each required specific knowledge to use safely. Each kept people alive when conventional food disappeared. The first famine food was acorn bread. Acorns fell from oak trees every autumn across Europe. Normally, acorns fed pigs. Humans didn't eat them. But acorns contain calories, fats, proteins, carbohydrates. The problem is tannins, bitter compounds that cause stomach pain. Raw acorns are inedible for humans, toxic in large quantities. Medieval peasants developed a process to make acorns edible. First, collect acorns in autumn, before pigs ate them all. Second, shell the acorns, remove the outer hard casing. Third, grind the acorn meat into coarse flour. Fourth, and most important, leach the tannins out. This required soaking ground acorns in water repeatedly. Change the water daily for 5 to 7 days. The water turned brown from tannins. Pour it out. Add fresh water. After a week, the acorn flour was less bitter, safe to eat. Mix acorn flour with small amounts of grain flour if available. If no grain existed, use acorn flour alone. Bake into dense, heavy bread, dark brown, intensely filling. The taste was bitter even after leaching. The texture was gritty. But acorn bread provided substantial calories. It prevented starvation. Forests full of oak trees became life-saving resources during famines. Peasants who knew how to process acorns survived. Others didn't. The second famine food was bark bread. Yes, tree bark. Ground into flour, baked into bread. This sounds impossible. Bark is woody, fibrous, indigestible. But the inner bark layer, called cambium, contains nutrients. Not many nutrients, but some, enough to matter. Pine trees were most commonly used, also birch, elm, willow. The process was labor-intensive and required specific timing. Spring was the best season. Sap rising made bark easier to remove. Peasants cut vertical strips from tree trunks. Careful not to kill the tree. Remove only narrow sections. Leave most bark intact. The outer rough bark was discarded. Only inner layers were kept. This cambium layer was whitish, slightly moist, fibrous. It had to be dried completely, spread in the sun for days. Once dry, the bark became brittle, ready for grinding. Peasants used stone mills, grinding bark into fine powder. The resulting flour was pale, almost white, very fine. Bark flour alone made terrible bread. Too little protein, too little gluten. It had to be mixed with other flours, grain if available, acorn flour if not. The sixth famine food was vetch porridge. Vetch is a legume related to peas and beans. It grew wild across Europe. Also cultivated as animal fodder. In good times, vetch fed livestock, not humans. The reason was simple. Some vetch species are toxic to people, but not all species. Common vetch was safe in small amounts. Desperate peasants learned which varieties could be eaten. Knowledge passed down through famine experiences. During the Great Famine, vetch consumption became widespread. Peasants collected vetch seeds, ground them into flour, mixed with grain flour when possible, used alone when necessary. The flour made dense porridge, heavy bread. The taste was slightly bitter, the texture was gritty, but vetch contained protein, carbohydrates, calories. It grew in poor soil, where wheat failed, where barley struggled. This made vetch a reliable famine crop. Medical records from medieval times note vetch consumption. Some people experienced digestive problems, weakness, paralysis in extreme cases. This was likely from eating toxic vetch species or consuming too much. But most who ate vetch survived. The alternative was starvation. The seventh famine food was wild garlic and onion soup. Wild alliums grew throughout European forests and meadows. Ramsons, wild leeks, field garlic. These plants appeared in early spring, before other foods were available. Peasants foraged for wild alliums aggressively during famines. The entire plant was edible. Leaves, stems, bulbs. Bulbs were most nutritious, but harder to find. Leaves were abundant, easy to collect in large quantities. Wild garlic soup was simple to prepare. Boil water, add chopped wild garlic leaves, cook until soft. The soup turned slightly greenish. The flavor was strong, pungent, overwhelming to modern tastes. But it provided vitamins, minerals, some calories. More importantly, it was hot. It filled stomachs. Psychological benefits mattered during famines. Warm food, something in the belly, hope for another day. Wild garlic grew in woodlands, in shaded areas. Peasants who knew good foraging locations had advantages. Some families guarded their gathering spots, returned yearly. The eighth famine food was millet porridge. Millet was considered inferior to wheat, lower status than barley. In normal times, it fed chickens, birds, sometimes pigs. But millet is hardy. It grows in poor soil, drought-resistant. When wheat crops failed, millet often survived. Peasants planted millet as insurance, a backup crop. During famines, that backup became the main food source. Millet grains are small, hard, require cooking to soften. Boil millet in water for 30 to 40 minutes. The grains swell, absorb water, become soft and edible. Millet porridge was bland, slightly sweet, very filling. It provided carbohydrates, some protein, B vitamins. Not nutritionally complete, but better than nothing. Millet saved lives across Central and Eastern Europe, Germany, Poland, Hungary. These regions relied heavily on millet during famines. The 9th famine food was turnip everything. Turnips grew easily, in poor soil, in cold weather. They were primarily animal feed, cattle fodder. Humans ate turnips, but not as a staple. During famines, turnips became the staple. Boiled turnips, mashed. More importantly, turnips were abundant. A small plot produced enormous quantities. Families could survive on turnips alone for weeks, even months. The monotony was psychologically devastating. Imagine eating only turnips, every meal, every day, the smell, the taste, the texture, all turnips. Medieval records mention turnip sickness, digestive problems from eating nothing else. But turnips kept people breathing. That was enough. The 10th famine food was blood pudding. When livestock died during famines, nothing was wasted. Meat was consumed immediately, before it spoiled. Organs were eaten, bones were boiled for broth, blood was collected. Precious liquid protein, blood spoils quickly. It had to be used immediately. Peasants mixed blood with whatever was available. Oats, barley, chopped onions, herbs. The mixture was stuffed into intestines, creating sausages, or cooked directly into thick pudding. Blood pudding was dark, almost black, dense. The texture was smooth, slightly grainy from added grain. The taste was metallic, rich, intensely iron-flavored. But blood is pure protein, highly nutritious. It contains iron, vitamins, fats. A small amount provided substantial nutrition. Blood pudding appeared across Europe during famines: Britain, France, Germany, Spain. Each region had variations. Some added pig fat, others used sheep blood. The principle remained constant: use everything, waste nothing. Animals that died from starvation or disease posed risks. Their meat might be contaminated, dangerous to eat. But desperate people ate anyway. Some became ill, some died from food poisoning, but more would have died from starvation. The calculation was brutal, but rational. These 10 foods represent different survival categories: foraged materials, animal products, alternative grains, wild plants. Each required knowledge, preparation skills, courage to eat the unappetizing. Together, they formed a survival system, a network of famine foods that kept populations alive. The 11th famine food was herb and grass soup. When all else failed, peasants turned to plants they normally ignored: clover, plantain, sorrel, chickweed, dandelion. These grew everywhere, in fields, along roads, in waste areas. Most were edible, some were nutritious. The challenge was identifying safe plants. Some common weeds were toxic, poisonous lookalikes existed. Knowledge meant survival, ignorance meant death. Experienced foragers taught others, pointed out safe plants, showed dangerous ones to avoid. Herb soup preparation was simple: collect whatever edible greens were available, wash them, boil in water until soft. The resulting soup was thin, green, barely substantial, but it provided vitamins, minerals, some calories. It prevented scurvy, a common famine disease. Vitamin C deficiency caused bleeding gums, weakness, death. Fresh greens prevented this, even in tiny amounts. Grass was sometimes added to soups, young grass shoots, before they became tough. Humans cannot digest grass cellulose efficiently, But boiling released some nutrients into the water. The grass itself was often strained out. 1 cup of peas became 2 cups with chaff added. The mixture was boiled into porridge or mashed into paste. The chaff passed through the digestive system undigested, but the stomach felt full. Hunger pangs decreased. This psychological effect mattered enormously. Feeling full, even without nutrition, reduced panic, reduced the psychological torment of constant hunger. The 13th famine food was bone marrow soup. Every animal bone contained marrow, the fatty substance inside long bones. In good times, marrow was a delicacy, reserved for the wealthy. During famines, peasants cracked every bone, extracted every bit of marrow. Old bones from previous meals, bones found in waste heaps, even ancient bones from fields. The bones were cracked open, marrow scooped out, boiled in water to create rich broth. Marrow is pure fat, highly caloric. A small amount provided significant energy. It helped bodies function, maintained body temperature, prevented the muscle wasting that came with starvation. The 14th famine food was seed porridge. When grain ran out, peasants turned to seeds meant for planting. This was a desperate measure. Eating seed grain meant no crop next year. It guaranteed future famine. But starving people cannot think about next year. They think about today, this moment, this hunger. Seed grain was carefully stored, protected. But when children cried from hunger, parents made terrible choices. Feed them today, worry about tomorrow later. Seeds were ground into flour, cooked into porridge. Every seed type was used. Wheat seeds, barley seeds, vegetable seeds, even flower seeds. Anything that could be ground and boiled. The nutrition varied. Some seeds were excellent, others minimal, but all provided some calories. Communities that ate their seed grain faced predictable futures. No planting meant no harvest meant continued famine. The cycle became self-reinforcing. This is how short famines became prolonged catastrophes. 1 bad year led to 3 or 4 years of suffering. The 15th and final famine food was water porridge. This was rock bottom, the last resort. When absolutely nothing else existed, water porridge was exactly what it sounds like. Boiled water, thickened with anything available, flour made from sawdust, ground dried leaves, clay. Yes, clay. Some peasants mixed clay into boiled water. It created substance, texture, weight in the stomach. Clay has no nutritional value. It can cause intestinal blockages, digestive damage. But it filled the empty space. It stopped the agonizing sensation of emptiness. Water porridge kept people technically alive for days, sometimes weeks, but it couldn't sustain life indefinitely. Those eating only water porridge were dying slowly, just not dying today. What do these 15 famine foods teach us? First, human beings are incredibly resilient. With almost nothing, people survived. They ate bark, grass, chaff, clay, things we consider inedible, but they lived. Second, knowledge is survival. Knowing which plants were safe, how to process acorns, which bark could be eaten. This knowledge passed through generations. It couldn't be learned from books. Books didn't exist for peasants. It was oral tradition, demonstrated skill. Third, waste is a luxury of abundance. Modern society discards enormous amounts of food, parts we consider inedible, unappealing, low quality. Medieval peasants would be horrified. They used everything, wasted nothing, because waste meant death. Fourth, food is more than nutrition. It's psychological, cultural, social. Warm soup, even weak soup, provided comfort. Something in the stomach reduced panic. The ritual of eating maintained humanity. Fifth, famines are social disasters. They don't affect everyone equally. The wealthy ate, the poor starved. Social structures determined who survived. This remains true today. Modern famines still kill the poorest first. Sixth, preparation matters. Families who stored diverse foods, who knew foraging, who maintained seed supplies, they survived at higher rates. Those who didn't plan ahead perished. Climate historians study medieval famines carefully. They reveal patterns, teach lessons about weather, agriculture, social systems. The Great Famine of 1315-1322 changed Europe. It killed millions, weakened populations, made them vulnerable to the Black Death decades later. Famines shaped history, determined which societies thrived, which collapsed. Today we face different but related challenges. Climate change, supply chain disruption, agricultural vulnerability. The lessons of medieval famine foods remain relevant. Resilience, knowledge, community cooperation. These still determine survival. Medieval peasants ate unimaginable things to stay alive. They showed courage, resourcefulness, determination. They survived conditions we cannot imagine, with foods we would reject. But they lived. They continued. They endured. And that made all the difference. That's how medieval peasants survived famines. Not through one food, through 15 desperate measures, each providing just enough. Together, barely sufficient, but sufficient, and life continued.